The sun over the wide Wyoming valley was a great golden coin, pressing its warmth down upon the land and painting the dusty main street of the town of Hope's Creek in shades of amber. For Stryker, a man whose life was measured in the steady turning of seasons and the slow, patient growth of his cattle, the morning felt like the first page of a brand new book. He stood on the worn wooden platform of the train station, the scent of creosote and hot metal hanging in the air. His broad shoulders, accustomed to the weight of hay bales and stubborn calves, were squared with a nervous hope he hadn't felt in years. His hands, calloused and strong from a lifetime of ranch work, fidgeted with the clean bandana he had tied around his neck for this special occasion. Today was the day his new life was supposed to begin. Today was the day Helen was to arrive. For months, the letters had traveled back and forth between his ranch and the distant, bustling city back east. Helen's words had been neat and proper, filled with a polite interest in his life and his faith. She spoke of wanting a fresh start, a quiet life under the big western sky. Stryker, a man of few words but deep feeling, had poured his heart into his own letters. He described the way the mountains turned purple at dusk, the sound of the creek bubbling behind his house, and his simple, steadfast belief in God's plan. He had been honest about his loneliness, about his dream of a family, of a wife to share the burdens and the blessings. He had asked her to come and she had said yes. He had spent weeks preparing, whitewashing the walls of the ranch house, building a new rocking chair for the porch, and praying every night for a future filled with shared happiness. His heart, once cautious, had begun to trust again. The distant, lonesome whistle of the train echoed through the valley, a sound that sent a jolt of both excitement and fear straight through him. He watched as the great iron beast chugged into the station, its wheels hissing steam and its carriages groaning to a halt. A few people stepped down, greeted by loved ones with laughter and embraces. Stryker scanned every face, his dark eyes searching for the woman from the photograph he kept in his Bible. But as the platform cleared, there was no sign of her. His hopeful smile began to fade, replaced by a confused frown. The station master, an older man with a kind, weathered face, approached him holding a small yellow piece of paper. "Sorry, Stryker," the man said gently, his voice low. "This came for you on the wire just after the last train yesterday. I figured you'd be in today to meet her." Stryker took the telegram, his rough fingers feeling suddenly clumsy. The message was brutally short. It said that Helen had changed her mind. She had married a shopkeeper back east and would not be coming to Wyoming. She wished him well. The words were like a physical blow. The bright, hopeful world of a moment before seemed to shrink and turn gray. The sounds of the town, the clatter of a wagon, the bark of a dog, felt far away. He had been a fool to believe a woman could want his simple life. He had been a fool to think God would grant him such an easy happiness. A deep, familiar ache settled in his chest, the old wound of rejection opened fresh and raw. He crumpled the telegram in his fist, nodded his thanks to the station master, and turned away from the empty platform. He rode back to his ranch in a heavy silence, the empty house waiting for him, a symbol of his failed dreams. That night, he prayed not for a wife, but for the strength to be content with the life he had alone. The next day dawned just as bright, but Stryker did not see its beauty. He threw himself into his work, mending a fence line with a fierce intensity, trying to sweat the disappointment out of his bones. It was late in the afternoon when the sound of an approaching wagon broke his concentration. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw a woman walking up the path to his house. For a wild, heart-stopping second he thought it was Helen. But as she drew nearer, he saw this woman was different. She was younger, with hair the color of rich honey and eyes the shade of the summer sky. She looked tired from her journey, her dress dusty, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that made him straighten up. "Are you Stryker?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "I am," he said, his own voice rough from disuse and dust. "My name is Rogue," she said, clasping her hands together nervously. "Helen was my cousin." Stryker flinched at the name. He said nothing, waiting for her to continue, his expression guarded. Rogue took a deep breath. "After she left to be married, I found your letters in her room. She had left them behind. I know it was wrong to read them, but I did. I read every single one." She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze steady and sincere. "I read about your faith and your ranch and the way you see God in the mountains and the streams. Your words, they felt true. They felt like the kind of life I've always prayed for. I felt the Lord telling me clear as day that my path was here. So I used the ticket she didn't want and I came. I know I am a day late, but I believe I am meant to be here." Her words washed over him, but they could not penetrate the wall of hurt he had built. She was a day late. The woman he asked for was gone, and in her place was a stranger who had read his private thoughts. The kindness in her eyes felt like a mockery of his pain. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry you came all this way, Miss Rogue," he said, his tone final and firm. "But that door is closed. I asked one woman to be my wife, and that plan is finished. I can't just trade one cousin for another. It doesn't work that way." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of bills, his savings for starting his new life with Helen. "Here. This is for a ticket back home. There's nothing for you here." He pressed the money into her hand. The hope in Rogue's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. But she did not cry or argue. She simply nodded, accepting his decision, though her faith in her journey remained unbroken. She turned and walked back down the path, a solitary figure against the vast landscape. Stryker watched her go, a confusing mix of guilt and resolve warring inside him. He had done the right thing, the sensible thing. He was sure of it. But as he stood alone on his porch, the silence of the ranch felt deeper and more empty than ever before. The town of Hope's Creek was small, a collection of sturdy wooden buildings clinging to the edge of the vast wilderness, and it was impossible for two souls to remain strangers within its confines for long. In the weeks that followed their difficult meeting on his porch, Stryker found his path crossing with Rogue's with a frequency that felt less like chance and more like a quiet, persistent nudge from a hand greater than his own. He saw her in the general store, carefully selecting fabric, her brow furrowed in concentration as she asked the shopkeeper about the price per yard. He saw her leaving the schoolhouse, having spent the afternoon helping the young teacher organize her lessons. Most often, he saw her at the white-steepled church, always seated beside Pastor Arthur and his wife, her head bowed in prayer or her voice lifted in hymn, a picture of serene belonging that stood in stark contrast to the lonely and uncertain woman who had first arrived. Stryker tried to harden his heart against these sightings. He told himself her presence was a constant reminder of his own humiliation, a living testament to a dream that had crumbled to dust. He threw himself into the endless work of the ranch with a renewed ferocity, rising before the sun and retiring long after it had set, his body aching with a fatigue he hoped would eclipse the restless thoughts in his mind. But try as he might, he could not erase the memory of her clear, honest eyes, or the quiet dignity with which she had accepted his rejection. He had expected tears or anger, but she had given him neither, only a quiet resignation that spoke of a strength he hadn't anticipated. One Saturday the town gathered for a church picnic on the grassy land beside the chuckling creek that gave the town its name. Families spread checkered blankets, children ran shrieking with laughter, and the air was rich with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh-baked pie. Stryker attended out of a sense of duty, standing a little apart from the merriment, a spectator to the joy of others. His eyes, as they so often did now, found Rogue. She was not on the edges but in the very heart of it all. She was helping Pastor Arthur's wife arrange plates of food, her movements efficient and graceful. He watched as a little girl no more than 5 years old, stumbled and scraped her knee, her wails instantly cutting through the cheerful noise. Before the child's own mother could reach her, Rogue was there. She knelt in the grass, not minding the dirt on her dress, and gathered the sobbing girl into her arms. She spoke soft, comforting words, wiping the tears away with the corner of her apron before gently cleaning the small scrape. The little girl's cries subsided into hiccups, and she soon clung to Rogue's hand, following her like a duckling. A strange, tight feeling settled in Stryker's chest. It wasn't jealousy or annoyance but something else entirely, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was the sight of an innate kindness, a natural mothering spirit that required no audience or reward. It was the very picture of the life he had imagined for himself, playing out before his eyes, and he was not a part of it. Later, as the sun began to dip lower, he saw her sitting on a log near the water, a Bible open on her lap. A few of the town's older children had gathered around her, and she was reading to them, her voice a gentle murmur that blended with the sound of the water. She belonged here. She had woven herself into the fabric of the community with a quiet determination that commanded his respect. The following Sunday after the service, Pastor Arthur found Stryker as he was untethering his horse from the post outside the church. The pastor was a tall, lean man whose eyes always seemed to hold a deep and abiding peace. "Stryker," he began, his voice as calm and steady as the flow of the creek. "A moment of your time?" Stryker nodded, his hands stilling on the leather reins. "I've been observing you," Arthur said gently. "And I've been observing Miss Rogue. She's a remarkable young woman. She tells me she felt God's call to come here, as clearly as you or I feel the wind on our faces. Stryker scuffed his boot in the dust. I know what she said, Pastor. But I asked for one woman and I got another. It felt dishonest. Like settling for a different horse than the one you bargained for. Arthur placed a gentle hand on Stryker's shoulder. My boy, sometimes God, in his infinite wisdom, answers our prayers not with what we want, but with what we truly need. We pray for a specific flower, and he sends us a different seed, one better suited to the soil of our lives. The question is not whether the gift is the one we expected, but whether we have the faith to plant the seed we are given. Are you so focused on the package that was lost that you are refusing to open the one that was delivered? The pastor's words settled deep within Stryker, echoing in the quiet places of his heart he had been trying to ignore. He rode home in a thoughtful silence, the words playing over and over in his mind. Was he holding on to the hurt, clutching it to his chest like a prized possession because it was easier than risking hope again? The answer came sooner than he expected. A few days later, the sky, which had been a serene blue all morning, began to bruise with dark, ominous clouds. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of his barn, and by afternoon, a fierce spring storm was unleashed upon the valley. Rain fell in blinding, horizontal sheets, and thunder cracked so loudly it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Stryker had secured the animals, but as he did a final head count in the near darkness of the storm-whipped afternoon, his heart sank. A young calf, born just a week prior, was missing. Its mother was lowing pitifully, straining against the fence line. The calf was too small, too weak to survive a night like this on its own. Gritting his teeth, Stryker pulled his slicker tight and plunged back into the tempest. For over an hour he battled the wind and rain, his calls swallowed by the gale. He searched the usual places, the lean-tos, the sheltered groves of trees, but found nothing. Fear for the helpless animal gnawed at him. Soaked to the bone and shivering with cold, he was on the verge of giving up when he saw a figure fighting its way toward him through the mud, a lantern held high against the gloom. It was Rogue, her dress plastered to her legs, a determined set to her jaw. Pastor Arthur saw you from the church window still searching, she shouted over the wind. He was worried. I have to help. Go back. Stryker yelled. It's not safe. But Rogue stood her ground, her eyes scanning the chaotic landscape. I grew up on a farm before moving to the city. A scared calf, especially a new one. It wouldn't go to an open shelter. It would find a thick, dense place to hide, somewhere it feels squeezed in, like its mother's side. She pointed toward a tangled, overgrown thicket of chokecherry bushes at the far edge of the pasture, a place Stryker had dismissed as too obvious. There. It would be in there. Desperation overriding his pride, Stryker followed her. They pushed through the thorny branches, the lantern light casting wild, dancing shadows. And there, curled into a tight, shivering ball in the very heart of the thicket, was the missing calf. It was terrified but alive. A feeling of immense relief, so powerful it was almost physical, washed over Stryker. He worked quickly, gently lifting the trembling animal into his arms. As they stumbled back toward the warm, dry barn, the storm finally began to abate. The rain softened to a drizzle, and a sliver of pale gold light broke through the retreating clouds. In the quiet aftermath, standing in the shelter of his barn with the saved calf nuzzling its mother, Stryker looked at Rogue. Her hair was a wild tangle, her face smudged with mud, and she was shivering from the cold. But in that moment he did not see a replacement for Helen, or a stranger from the east. He saw the woman who had read his soul in his letters. He saw the kindness that comforted children, the faith that built a new life from nothing, and the sharp, intelligent mind that had just saved something precious to him. Pastor Arthur was right. He had been staring so hard at the closed door, he had failed to see the beautiful, unexpected window God had opened right beside it. His own pride and hurt suddenly seemed as small and insignificant as the puddles forming in the yard. Rogue, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She turned to him, her blue eyes wide and questioning. I was wrong, he stated simply, the admission freeing a weight from his soul. My pride was hurt and I took it out on you. I'm truly sorry. You are not a day late. I was just a man too blind to see the blessing standing right in front of him. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding not with nervousness, but with a clean, clear hope. My courting of Helen was done through letters. It wasn't real. Would you allow me to court you properly? Here. With Pastor Arthur and his wife to chaperone. So I can get to know the remarkable woman you truly are. A slow, radiant smile spread across Rogue's face, brighter than the sun breaking through the clouds. The hope that had been deferred for so long now shone, undimmed and brilliant in her eyes. "Yes, Stryker," she whispered, her voice full of a joy that had finally found its home. "I would like that very much." The proper courtship of Stryker and Rogue began with a gentle slowness that mirrored the turning of the seasons on the Wyoming ranch. It was a time of discovery, built not on hurried letters sent across a continent, but on shared moments and quiet conversations held under the watchful and kind eyes of Pastor Arthur and his wife. Their first official outing was a simple picnic by the very creek where Stryker had first seen Rogue's gentle spirit with the children. This time, however, they were not distant observers of each other's lives, but the central characters in their own unfolding story. The pastor's wife sat a respectful distance away with her mending, a silent guardian of propriety, as Stryker and Rogue spread a blanket on the soft grass. They talked not of the futures they had imagined alone, but of the future they now dared to dream of together. Stryker learned of Rogue's childhood, of her love for growing things, and her secret wish for a small flower garden. Rogue learned of Stryker's parents, who had built the ranch from nothing, and his deep, abiding love for the land that was his legacy. Sunday afternoons became their sacred time. After the church service, with the good pastor as their chaperone, they would walk along the winding paths that skirted the town. They discussed sermons and scripture, finding a shared foundation of faith that was stronger and more profound than anything Stryker had ever described in his letters to Helen. He discovered that Rogue's faith was not just for Sundays, it was the very compass by which she navigated the world, a steady, unwavering light that had guided her to him even when he had tried to turn her away. Evenings were spent on the porch of the pastor's house, where Stryker would visit and they would sit in the rocking chairs, watching the fireflies dance over the lawn as the sky deepened from blue to velvet black. They spoke of practical things, the new herd of cattle, the need for a stronger barn door, the best place to plant that flower garden. With every conversation, every shared silence, the fragile seedling of affection planted on the day of the storm took root, growing stronger and deeper with each passing week. Months drifted by, turning the green valley to a sea of golden wheat, then dusting the mountain peaks with an early sprinkle of snow. The love between Stryker and Rogue was no longer a tentative hope but a solid, unshakable truth, as real and enduring as the ancient hills surrounding them. One crisp autumn evening, as the last of the sun's rays set the maple trees ablaze with color, Stryker led Rogue to the small, well-tended garden behind the church. It was the place where she had felt the most peace upon her arrival, a little piece of heaven she had helped nurture. There, surrounded by the fading glory of late-blooming roses and the scent of turned earth, Stryker took her hands in his. His calloused thumbs gently stroked her knuckles as he looked into her eyes, his own gaze clear and full of a love that had been tested and found true. "Rogue," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You came into my life when I had given up. You saw the man I could be, even when I couldn't see it myself. You have brought more joy and light to my world than I ever knew was possible. Building a life with you, a life founded on God and this land, is the greatest dream I will ever have." He slowly lowered himself to one knee, pulling a simple, beautiful gold band from his pocket. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of pure happiness welled in Rogue's eyes, spilling over to trace warm paths down her cheeks. There was not a single moment of hesitation. "Yes," she breathed, her voice a joyful sob. "Oh, Stryker, yes." Their wedding was a celebration that filled the little white church to its very walls. The entire town of Hope's Creek gathered to witness the union they had all watched blossom. Rogue wore a simple but elegant dress she had sewn herself, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the creek bank. Stryker stood tall and proud at the altar, his heart so full he thought it might burst. As they exchanged their vows before God and their community, promising to love and cherish each other for all the days of their lives, it felt less like the start of something new and more like the final, perfect piece of a puzzle settling into its rightful place. That very day they moved into the ranch house together, not as strangers sharing a roof, but as husband and wife, beginning their sacred life together in the way faith and tradition dictated. The first year of their marriage was a tapestry woven with threads of hard work, shared laughter, and deepening devotion. The ranch, infused with the warmth of their partnership, seemed to flourish more than ever before. Rogue's flower garden bloomed in a riot of color by the front porch, and the smell of her fresh-baked bread often greeted Stryker when he came in from the fields. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Rogue's knitting needles clicking softly, she placed a hand on his arm. Her eyes shone with a secret, radiant joy. "Stryker," she said softly, "our family is going to grow. We're going to have a baby." The joy that erupted in Stryker's heart was so powerful it stole his breath. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious treasure on earth, which to him she was. He whispered a prayer of thanks to God for the second chance he had almost foolishly thrown away for this woman, and for the new life they had created. The following months were a time of eager preparation. Stryker, with careful, loving hands, built a sturdy cradle from oak, sanding the wood until it was silken smooth. Rogue sewed tiny garments and blankets, her heart singing with every stitch. When the time came, on a quiet night under a blanket of 1,000 stars, their son was born. He was strong and healthy, with a thatch of dark hair like his father and eyes that held the same summer sky blue as his mother. As Stryker sat on the edge of their bed, his large, work-roughened hand gently cradling the impossibly small head of his newborn son, he felt a love so profound and overwhelming it brought fresh tears to his eyes. Rogue, tired but glowing, smiled up at him from her pillow. "His name is Caleb," she whispered, a name that meant faithful and devoted. Stryker looked from his son's peaceful face to the face of his wife, the woman whose faith had built their entire world. The journey had been unexpected, filled with a rejection that now felt a lifetime away, but it had led them here to this perfect moment. He leaned down and kissed Rogue's forehead, then gently kissed his son's. "You are right on time for me," he whispered to them both, the words now holding the weight of a forever love, a testament to faith, and the beautiful truth of God's perfect timing. If your heart was warmed by the journey of Stryker and Rogue, a story that proves God's plan is always worth waiting for, then you won't want to miss the next tale of faith and love from the world of Hope's Creek. Subscribe to the channel so you are the first to know when a new story of hope and redemption arrives. Your support helps us continue to share these beautiful, faith-filled stories with the world.